I never wanted to be the kind of wife who snoops. It always felt wrong, like crossing an invisible line of respect. Trust was something I'd built my marriage on, even after the cracks that had threatened to break us in the past. Ben and I had been through tough times, moments when our love felt fragile, hanging by a thread. But we promised each other we'd move forward, rebuild, and leave the mistakes behind. For a while, I believed we had. But that night, something didn't feel right. It wasn't one big thing. It was the small changes that had slowly added up. Ben had been pulling away, his usual warmth replaced with an unfamiliar distance. He started keeping his phone close, brushing off my questions with a laugh or a quick excuse. And then there was the watch. His Apple Watch had become a constant companion, lighting up with notifications that he always seemed in a hurry to dismiss. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just stressed from work or caught up in something harmless. But the uneasy feeling gnawed at me, whispering that something was off. That night, as he stepped into the shower, leaving the watch charging on the counter, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My mind was spinning, replaying every little moment that hadn't made sense. The late night text alerts, the vague answers, and the way he seemed to avoid eye contact when I asked him simple questions. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the watch. Checking it felt like betraying the very trust one was trying to protect. But his behavior had planted seeds of doubt I couldn't shake. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the watch. A part of me didn't want to know. I thought about putting it down and pretending I'd never seen anything. But my curiosity and the growing suspicion gnawing at me won out. Slowly, I picked it up, feeling the cool metal against my fingertips. The screen lit up, and the first thing I saw was a notification from Emma, our neighbor. My stomach dropped. Emma and I weren't exactly best friends, but we had a friendly relationship. She'd wave at me over the fence, sometimes stopping by with freshly baked cookies or a quick hello when walking her dog. We'd shared laughs about gardening and swapped advice on dealing with noisy neighbors. I had no reason to distrust her, until now. The notification glared at me. It was a photo of her tying a towel in her bathroom. My breath caught in my throat. My mind scrambled to make sense of it, but I already knew. A cold sweat broke out across my skin as I tapped on the message thread, my fingers trembling. The messages unfolded like a nightmare. They weren't vague or harmless. They were explicit, filled with flirtatious remarks and private jokes that told a story I didn't want to read. References to places, times, and shared moments that I had no idea about. The casual intimacy of their conversation felt like a slap in the face. My heart pounded harder with every new message I read. Then, just as I thought it couldn't get worse, I saw another thread. Enna, my best friend, my confidant, my lifeline through some of the darkest moments of my life. The one who had cried with me when Ben and I were on the verge of separation. The one who had assured me that he and I would get through anything. My hands trembled as I opened the chat. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But the messages hit me like a punch to the gut. Anna wasn't just being flirty. Her messages were raw, detailed, recounting stolen moments and intimate encounters that I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. She joked about things only someone deeply involved would know, about places Ben and I had been, moments I thought were ours alone. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Emma and Anna, two women who had been part of my everyday life, two women I trusted without question. My mind spiraled with questions I couldn't answer. How long had this been going on? Why them? Was this why Ben had been so distant? The weight of it all crashed down on me. These were people who smiled at me, who acted like everything was fine, who laughed with me as if nothing was wrong. How could they look me in the eye while hiding this? My stomach churned as the reality of the betrayal hit me all at once. I had been completely blindsided, and the life I thought I had suddenly felt like a lie. By the time Ben came out of the shower, I was sitting at the kitchen table, his watch in front of me. My hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white from the pressure, as if holding on to some last shred of composure. I hadn't planned what I was going to say, but when he saw my face, the color drained from his. He froze in the doorway, a towel draped over his shoulder, his damp hair clinging to his forehead. "What's wrong?" he asked cautiously, his tone forced and uneven. His eyes darted to the watch on the table, then back to my face. He already knew. I took a deep breath, but my voice came out flat and cold. "I went through your messages," I said, "with Emma and Anna." He didn't even try to deny it. His entire body seemed to deflate as he stepped forward, pulling out the chair across from me and sinking into it. His elbows rested on the table, and he buried his head in his hands. For a moment, the silence between us was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. The air felt heavy, thick with tension and unspoken words. I stared at him, waiting for something, an explanation, an apology, anything. But he just sat there, as if he didn't know where to begin. "Say something," I demanded. My voice cracked despite my efforts to keep it steady. I could feel my heart pounding, a dull ache spreading through my chest, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "I don't even know where to start," he muttered, his voice muffled by his hands. Slowly, he lifted his head, his eyes red and filled with something between shame and fear. It just happened." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsher than I intended. "It just happened? With Emma and Anna? The two people I trusted the most? How long?" "Ben." His eyes flickered with guilt as he looked down at the table. "A few months," he admitted quietly, almost as if saying it out loud made it more real. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "Go this far?" I repeated, my voice rising. "How far has it gone, Ben? Tell me." "With Emma, a few times," he said hesitantly, his words slow and deliberate, like he was picking through a minefield. "With Anna," he paused, his gaze fixed firmly on the table, unable to meet my eyes. "More than that." I felt the ground shift beneath me, like the world I built was collapsing in on itself. My chest tightened as the weight of his words settled in. Anna, my best friend, my confidant. I had shared everything with her, my fears, my insecurities, even the moments I doubted my marriage. And Emma, she was just a neighbor, a friendly face I waved to when I saw her in the garden. These two women had been part of my daily life, part of my circle, and now they were part of this nightmare. "Why, Ben," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears. "Why would you do this?" He finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and something that resembled defensiveness. "You want the truth?" he said, his voice growing firmer. "It started after you sent those photos." I froze, the air around me turning icy. "What are you talking about?" 2 years ago, he said, leaning forward, his tone growing more agitated. "When you sent those pictures to other guys. Do you have any idea how much that crushed me? I forgave you because I thought we could move on, but I couldn't forget. That was years ago. Ben," I snapped, the sharpness in my voice surprising even me. "And I never even met those men. It was a mistake, a stupid, desperate mistake. I owned up to it, and you said we were past it. Well, I wasn't." He shot back, his voice rising. "I tried, but I couldn't let it go. Every time I looked at you, I thought about it. And I guess I wanted to hurt you the way you hurt me." His words hit me like a blow, knocking the air out of my lungs. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of my shaky breathing. I stared at him, my mind racing to process what he just said. He had turned my deepest regret, the thing I had worked so hard to make amends for, into an excuse for months of betrayal. And not just with anyone, with two women who were supposed to be part of my support system. I pushed my chair back, the screech of wood against tile echoing in the room. "You didn't just hurt me, Ben," I said, my hands trembling as I stood. "You destroyed everything. How am I supposed to face Anna? Or Emma? Do you even realize what you've done?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, his shoulders slumped, his hands hanging limply between his knees, as if the weight of what he'd done had finally caught up to him. "I need time," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I can't even look at you right now." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving him sitting alone at the table. I left the house that night, driving aimlessly until I found myself parked at a nearby overlook. I sat there for hours, staring at the city lights and trying to piece together how my life had fallen apart so quickly with tears streaming down my face. The ache in my chest was unbearable, and I knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. Ben's betrayal wasn't just about the affairs. It was the deliberate way he'd weaponized my past against me, the way he'd involved people I trusted, people I cared about. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was as chaotic as I had feared. I decided to confront Anna first. She came over to my house at my request, looking nervous but composed, until I started talking. The moment I mentioned the messages, her face crumpled, and she started crying uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "I never meant for this to happen. It was stupid, and I don't know what I was thinking." Her apology sounded genuine, but it didn't make me feel any better. "How could you do this to me, Anna?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You were supposed to be my best friend. I told you everything about my life, even the hard stuff with Ben. You knew how much I was struggling." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have an excuse," she said quietly. "I was selfish. I betrayed you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't mean to hurt you." I wanted to believe her. A part of me even wanted to forgive her. But every time I looked at her face, all I could see was betrayal. I told her I needed space, and she left, her shoulders slumped, whispering, "I'm sorry," one last time before closing the door. Emma was a different story. I couldn't bring myself to face her at all. Every time I saw her outside, watering her garden, walking her dog, or chatting with another neighbor, I felt a wave of anger and disgust. Sometimes I imagined her wearing a smug smile, as if she'd won something, while other times I convinced myself she looked guilty, avoiding my gaze on purpose. I never approached her, and she never approached me. The unspoken tension was unbearable, and I started timing my errands and outdoor activities to avoid crossing paths with her. Meanwhile, Ben tried to make things right, or at least what he thought was right. He cut off all contact with Anna and Emma, deleted their numbers, and promised he'd never speak to them again. He suggested we try therapy, saying he wanted to fix what's broken between us. But every time I thought about sitting across from him in a therapist's office, all I could see were those messages, the casual cruelty of his words, the way he laughed and flirted with the two women who had been such a big part of our lives. "I want to try," I told him one night, "but I don't know if I can ever trust you again." He nodded, his face heavy with guilt. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. But his words felt hollow, weighed down by the damage already done. Now, months later, we are separated. Ben moved into a small apartment across town, and I stayed in the house. It's strange being here alone, surrounded by memories of what once felt like a happy life. Some days, I feel a flicker of hope, wondering if time and effort could rebuild what we lost. But most days, I feel the heavy weight of betrayal, knowing that some wounds don't heal easily. The scars from this experience run deep. Trust feels like a distant memory, something fragile and easily broken. Whether Ben and I can ever reconcile, or whether I'll find the strength to walk away for good, I don't know. All I know is that this betrayal will haunt me for a long time, a painful reminder of how quickly the people you love can let you down.